Hello, everyone, and welcome to this third episode in this Chess Endgame Tactics series, where I combine two very important parts of chess, tactics, and endgames. And today we feature an endgame with a queen attack. So let's take a look at this position. And here it is white to move. And what do you think the best move is here for white? And if we look at this position, it looks like black is one square away from promoting his pawn and going ahead with two queens here, which would be winning. So white needs to act immediately. How does he continue? What does he do in this position? Pause the video if you need more time. If not, let's find out. All right, so the evaluation is slightly ahead in white's favor, and it looks like the move to keep him ahead is queen to f8. And so that was played in this game, queen to f8, checking the black king. And now the black king has a couple options. But if he goes to g5, well, then that would lead to a mate in 2 here with queen to f4 check. And then after the king retreats away, we would have queen to h4 mate. So black must avoid that. And if we go back to the beginning here, so after check by the queen on f8, we just saw that queen to g5 is a bad continuation. So king to g5 is a bad continuation. And so the king must move to h5 here. So the game continued with king to h5. And now the queen can move to f4 here. And so now the threat is a mate in 1 here, just moving over to h4 and delivering a mate here. So, how does black continue? What does black do to avoid that? In the game, it looks like g5 was played, attacking the queen and covering this h4 square. But some other options might be queen to e7, moving up here and covering that h4 square. But then we would have g4, which is possible. And then if the king moves here, which is forced to h4, then white could continue with this h3 move. And so this is an interesting move here. Once again, now there is a threat of queen to h6 with mate, and the king would not be able to capture this g4 pawn, of course, after this h3 move. So this threat of mate on h7 by the queen. And so queen to b7, if that is played, here with check, well, then we just have f3, and then queen to g7 to try and cover that. But then the game would just continue. Let's see here. With this g5 move, a discovered check. And so then the king would be forced to move up. But then we would have mate here with queen to g4. So that's an interesting possibility. If we go back to this queen to b7 check and then blocking with the f pawn, now let's see, queen to g7 could be played. Another option, that's what we looked at, queen to g7 and then g5, the discovered check. But instead, of the queen move, if g5 is played, well, then that would lead to an immediate mate with queen to g3. And then, let's see here. After f3, once again, if this is played, capturing, well, then the queen would just capture, and now this pawn cannot promote, or it would just be captured, and white would be winning there. So if we go back, and I'll go back to the very beginning. Hopefully I didn't lose any of you in those variations. So from the beginning, we have queen to f8 check. The king moves down here to h5. And then we have the queen moving here to f4, threatening a mate with queen to h4. So g5 is played. One other thing I wanted to look at before we continue with the game variation is, instead of g5, it looks like this possibility here, queen to f1, g1, or h1. That's what the computer recommends to keep the game closer to even, but white would end up with a about a +1 advantage. So in this, we have queen to h1, forcing the king to capture, and then promotion to queen here with check. So the white king would have to move, and then this move is possible, blocking the attack of the white queen. But here it's recommended to keep the queens on the board. If they were traded off, white could chase the black king away, and in the end game, white would have this extra pawn, and he would have chances of winning here. It may be difficult. He would have to try and swing his king around. If these two pawns, the g and h pawns, were traded off and black was able to stay in front of this passed f pawn, well, then it would just end up being a draw. So the only way white could try and win is to see if he could swing his king out and around and try and press the black king away. So I don't know, usually in a pawn endgame, the side with that extra pawn should be winning. But then again, you have to watch out for the enemy king. If they are in front of your pawn, it's going to be harder to win. Or if, let's say, the g and h pawn were traded away and white trades away his f and g pawns and ends up with this h pawn, well, then if it's a rook pawn, your opponent's king can just stay in front of that pawn and block it, and it would end up being a draw. Okay, so back to the game variation. After queen to f4, we have the threat here of queen to h4 with a mate. So g5 was played, attacking the queen and preventing the queen from moving to h4. And then the game continued with queen to f7 check. And so king to h6 was played. Then another check by the queen. So the queen just keeps up the pressure, attacking with checks. The king moves back to h5. But now we have g4 here. And if this pawn is captured with king takes g4, well, then we would just have queen checks, and the king would be forced to move. But then it would lead to a mate here. So that must be avoided. And so back to that g4 check position, the king would be forced to go to h4 here. But now we have queen to f3 with the threat of just moving over here to h3. So that's how the game continued. But if we go back and look at this position, white has to be careful not to just check again, as queen to h6 would allow the black king to escape after king captures the pawn on g4. And now the best that white could do is just start chasing the black king around. So this is one possible variation. We just see the king running around, and he would have to keep checking the king now so as to prevent this other pawn from promoting. So in order to prevent all of that, in the game, queen to f3 was played with this threat of queen to h3 mate. And so black played queen to e4 to prevent that. And then after capture, the other pawn promotes. But after this h3 move, once again, the black king here now is trapped. And so in the game, queen to d7 was played to try and cut off this mate up here with queen captures on h7, which would have been mate. But now we have queen to f3 with a threat of mate here. And if black tried to prevent it with this, well, then the queen could just go there anyway. And then after capture, the pawn would capture with mate. So that wouldn't have worked. What is another option? So after that, black resigned, and white's queen attack was just too much for the black king. Even though black had that pawn one square away, if we go back to that beginning position, this pawn was one square away from promoting. And then, after a promotion, there's a threat of queen to h1 checking here, or actually queen to f1 would be a mate after this pawn promotes. So white correctly began a queen attack, chasing the black king around until he was mated. So I hope you enjoyed this video where we were able to combine endgame study with tactics, because sometimes endgames can be a little boring, and a lot of people like to attack. So by combining tactics and studying tactics in the endgame, it makes it a little bit more interesting. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Feel free to leave comments or suggestions. And thank you, everyone. Have a great day.